A young white CEO named Claire Bennett leaves her office long after midnight, shaken by a brutal board meeting and too exhausted to drive. Malik Turner, a black single dad who works nights in her building, quietly takes her home after seeing that she is not safe on her own. By sunrise, Claire is gone, and the same people who smiled at her in public begin turning Malik into the perfect man to blame. What no one knows is that Claire is still alive, trapped inside her own body after a staged medical crisis, hearing every lie spoken over her bed. As Malik fights for his daughter, his dignity, and the truth, one kind sentence begins to echo through the whole story: "You are not alone." What follows is a slow, emotional unraveling of greed, loyalty, and the soft power of being truly seen. At Silent Proof Stories, every silence hides pain, every truth cuts deep, and every story leaves a scar. Subscribe now. The glass tower still glowed against the midnight sky, every polished window holding the last light of a meeting that should have ended hours ago. Claire Bennett stepped out of the executive conference room with the posture of someone trained never to bend in public. At 32, she had already become the face of Bennett Capital, the young white CEO people described as sharp, composed, and impossible to shake. Tonight, though, the image was cracking. The board had pushed her hard. Sell the South properties, cut the workers, clear the debt faster, stop hesitating. They called it necessary discipline. Claire called it stripping living people down to numbers. She had held her ground through the vote, through the cold stares, through Victor Hale's careful voice telling her she was letting emotion cloud judgment. But once the room emptied, all that strength seemed to drain out through her heels onto the marble floor. By the time she reached the private garage, her hand was trembling so badly she nearly dropped her keys. She caught them on the second try, then stood still for a moment, as if she had forgotten what came next. Her face looked almost grey under the low lights. From across the garage, Malik Turner noticed immediately. Malik worked nights in facilities support, and long ago life had trained him to recognize the difference between tired and unwell. His little daughter Nia was asleep in the back seat of his car nearby, curled under a small blanket because the sitter had cancelled and he had no one else. He started toward Claire slowly. "I'm fine," she said before he even reached her. But her voice was thin, and when she lifted one hand to wave him off, her fingers were shaking. Malik stopped a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. He asked if she wanted him to call a car. When she shook her head, he asked if she needed an ambulance. That answer came faster. "No ambulance," Claire said. No scene, no questions, no headlines. He understood more than she explained. People with money had privacy, but they also lived under a different kind of glass. One public stumble could become a rumour before sunrise. Malik offered the only thing left. He told her he could drive her home himself. For a second, she looked ready to refuse again. Then the strength went out of her shoulders. "I haven't slept properly in days," she admitted as he opened the passenger door. "Everyone around me wants something. A signature, a statement, a piece of me." The city had gone quiet by the time they pulled onto the street. Buildings passed in dark mirrors. Traffic lights changed for almost no one. In the back seat, Nia stirred beneath her blanket and lifted her sleepy head. "Daddy," she mumbled, rubbing one eye, "is the lady sick?" Claire let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh, then caught on the edge of tears instead. Malik glanced at her, but kept his voice calm, the same tone he had learned to use with hurting people, slow, plain, and steady. "She's had a hard night," he said. Claire looked out the window. "I have money, lawyers, a penthouse, and more locked doors than I can count," she whispered. "I still feel like the loneliest person in this city." Malik kept his eyes on the road. "You are not alone." The car went still after that, as if the words had made room for breathing again. Claire's building rose out of the dark like a place built for distance. The lobby was all stone, glass, and soft light, beautiful in the way expensive places often were, and cold in the same breath. Malik parked at the curb, stepped out, and came around to help her before she could protest. She made it 3 steps across the lobby before her balance shifted. Her hand caught his arm, light but urgent. For 1 second, the polished young CEO disappeared, and there was only a tired woman trying not to fall in front of a stranger. "I'm okay," she whispered. I know, Malik said gently, even though they both knew she was not. He walked her to the elevator and then all the way to her front door upstairs when she fumbled with the entry panel twice. Once she was inside the quiet of her penthouse doorway, she turned to him with something almost like embarrassment in her eyes. Please don't tell anyone you saw me like this. Malik nodded. I won't. She hesitated, studying his face as if she had just realized he was more than a helpful shadow in a long night. What's your name? Malik Turner. She repeated it softly. Malik Turner, as though saying it might anchor her to something honest. When he headed back downstairs, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its windows dark and unreadable. He glanced once, then kept walking. In a city like this, expensive cars were never hard to find. A few minutes later, he was driving home with Nia asleep again in the back seat, believing the night had finally ended. By morning, Claire Bennett was missing. The pounding started before sunrise, hard enough to shake the thin apartment door in its frame. Malik came awake at once. For one confused second he thought he had overslept. Then he saw the blue flicker of police lights through the curtains. Nia, still in her pajamas, sat up on the couch bed and looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. When he opened the door, 2 officers and a detective stood in the hall. Mr. Turner, the detective said, "Where is Claire Bennett?" The question hit like cold water. Malik stared at him, then answered the only way he could. He said he had taken her home, made sure she got inside, and left. The detective told him Claire had been reported missing less than an hour earlier. A member of her household staff had found her bed untouched. Her phone was still inside the penthouse. No one could account for where she had gone after midnight. They showed Malik still images from building security. There he was, helping Claire through the lobby, one hand at her elbow, her face turned away. But after that, the trail blurred. There was no clear footage of Claire leaving, no clean record of anyone else entering, and no mention at all of the black SUV Malik remembered parked across the street. He answered every question calmly. He told them what she said, how unsteady she had been, how tired she looked. Still, their eyes kept moving past his face. They took in the cramped apartment, his worn shoes by the door, Nia's schoolbooks stacked on a folding chair, and the silence started to feel shaped before he spoke. Nia pressed herself against his side, already sensing that truth might not be enough today. By mid-morning, Claire's face was everywhere. Every local station carried the same smiling photograph, the one taken at a charity gala where she looked polished, untouchable, and fully in command of her world. Beneath it, the word missing ran in heavy letters that made the story feel both urgent and strangely prepared. Her older brother, Daniel Bennett, appeared first. He stood outside the family's townhouse in a dark coat, his voice tight with practiced emotion. He asked the public for prayers, for privacy, for any information that might bring his sister home. Then, with careful hesitation, he mentioned the last person known to be with her. He did not say Malik's name at first. He did not need to. Suspicion travelled faster when dressed as concern. Later, Claire's Aunt Margaret spoke beside him, one hand pressed lightly to her chest. She sat on the family trust and carried herself like a woman used to shaping rooms without raising her voice. Her grief sounded polished, almost musical, as if she had rehearsed where to pause and when to look down. Inside Bennett Capital, Board Chair Victor Hale gave a statement to senior staff. He called Claire's disappearance a personal tragedy, then reminded everyone that the company had obligations, deadlines, and markets that could not pause for emotion. Watching it all unfold on a muted television in his apartment, Malik understood something that made his stomach turn. These people were not grieving first. They were securing position. By afternoon, rumour took over the rest. Online posts claimed Malik had kidnapped Claire for money, though no ransom demand had appeared anywhere. Malik repeated the same story until the words lost all shape. He told the detective he had driven Claire home because she was in no condition to be left alone. He told him she could barely keep her balance, that her hands were shaking, that she had looked more worn down than drunk. He told him he walked her to the door, waited until she got inside, and then left with his daughter asleep in the back seat. It was the truth every time. Still, each retelling seemed to make him sound less like a man who helped, and more like a man building a careful excuse. Then, in the middle of the questions, one small memory returned with painful clarity. At her door, just before stepping inside, Claire had leaned lightly against the frame and whispered something he had not understood then. "If anything happens," she had said, "they'll call me unstable." The line had felt strange in the moment, but the night had already been full of things Malik could not place. Now it sat in his mind like a warning bell that had rung too softly. He also remembered the black SUV across the street. It had still been there when he came back down from the penthouse. Same dark windows, same quiet engine. He had noticed it because the car seemed to be waiting, though he could not have said for whom. When he added that detail, the detective's face hardened instead of opening. "You didn't mention any SUV earlier," he said. Malik tried to explain that everything had happened fast, that he was remembering piece by piece, but he could feel the room turning against him. When he finally walked out, he understood something cold and simple. Truth by itself might not save him at first. Claire thought she was still inside a dream made of sound. A soft machine kept time somewhere near her head. Shoes crossed a floor she could not see. A door opened, closed, opened again. Light pressed red against her eyelids, then faded. She tried to lift a hand toward it, and found nothing answered. Panic did not come all at once. It rose slowly, like cold water. Her mind was awake, but her body felt impossibly far away, sealed behind weight and distance. She could not open her eyes, she could not turn her head, she could not force air into words. Time had lost its shape. Minutes and hours drifted together until even fear became hard to measure. A doctor's voice came and went above her. Swelling, looks improved, trauma was significant. Response remains uncertain. Claire clung to each word because they were the only proof she still existed somewhere inside the silence. Then other voices entered, voices she knew too well. Victor Hale spoke first, calm and clipped, like every cruel decision should be filed neatly. Daniel Bennett answered with a lower, shakier voice, but not shaky from grief, from pressure. "We need temporary control in place before markets react," Victor said. Daniel exhaled. "And the staff? They know what they need to know." A pause followed, then Victor again, quieter now. "As for the janitor's story, it remains useful." Claire screamed inside herself. She tried to move, to open her eyes, to tear one finger free from the dead stillness of her body. Nothing happened. Around her, men discussed investor confidence, legal timing, and her life as if she had already left it behind. Dr. Victor did not lower his voice because he did not think he needed to. He told someone near the foot of Claire's bed that she had been under strain for months, too much pressure, too little rest. He said she had become erratic, emotional, hard to reason with. The story came out smooth, as if he had practiced it on the drive over. According to him, Claire had wandered away in a confused state after being dropped home, then collapsed near a secluded service road where she was later found unresponsive. Daniel stood beside him and asked what needed to be signed. "Whatever protects the company," Victor said, "whatever protects the family assets." In the darkness behind her closed eyes, Claire understood the shape of what they were doing. They were building a version of her that could not be trusted. A woman too unstable to lead, too fragile to question them, too broken to own her own voice. If she could not speak, they would speak for her. If she could not move, they would move everything around her. She tried again to force life into her body. A hand, a finger, an eyelid. Anything. Nothing answered. Her mind burned with effort, but her body remained a locked room. Sometime later, the air changed. Softer footsteps. A different presence. A nurse came close enough for Claire to smell clean soap and hospital linen. Her name tag brushed lightly against the bed rail. Elena Ruiz. As Elena adjusted something near Claire's shoulder, she went still. A tear had slipped from the corner of Claire's eye. Very gently, Elena wiped it away. Then she leaned in and whispered, "If you can hear me, keep fighting." Voices kept returning to Claire's room, as if her bed had become a conference table. Victor ordered private handling of her care, restricted visitor access, and a tighter list of approved staff. He said too many eyes created risk, too many questions created confusion. Everything about his tone suggested he was not protecting Claire at all. He was protecting the story. Daniel's anxiety sounded different. He was not asking whether his sister was frightened, or in pain, or aware. He kept circling back to headlines, investor panic, and what reporters might uncover if the situation became public before the board was ready. Even now, with Claire trapped inside her own silence, her brother feared scandal more than loss. Then Margaret arrived, precise as ever. Her heels clicked once, then stopped near the bed. Had Claire changed anything in the trust? She asked. Any adjustments to voting control? Any recent amendments? The question landed harder than anything else. Claire understood then, with a clarity so painful it felt physical, that greed had not paused to wait for proof of death. They had come to measure power while she was still alive enough to hear them do it. When Malik's name came up, Victor spoke it with thin contempt, as though kindness from a man like him could only be a tool or a threat. Claire wanted to shout, to warn him, to tell him he was walking into something darker than suspicion. Instead, she lay still, listening. Into that terrible silence came the memory of his voice in the car, steady and human. "You are not alone, Claire." The call came from a supervisor who sounded embarrassed before he even spoke. He said the suspension was temporary, procedural, nothing personal. By noon, another message followed from Human Resources, colder than the first. His access had been revoked. His position had been terminated pending the outcome of the investigation. No one used the word fired, but the meaning arrived all the same. What made it worse was how public quiet humiliation could be. In a building where everyone watched everyone, news moved faster than elevators. By the time Malik walked to Nia's school that afternoon, people already knew his face. Two parents near the gate lowered their voices when they saw him coming, then failed to lower them enough. One pulled her son a little closer. Malik felt it, but kept his shoulders level. Nia slipped her small hand into his and asked if they were still getting pasta for dinner. He told her yes, though he had not yet checked what was left in the cupboard. Money had been thin long before Claire Bennett entered his life. When Tasha got sick, Malik burned through savings, extra shifts, and pride without a second thought. He had spent years balancing work with hospice visits, learning how quickly a family could slide from steady to fragile. After she died, he kept things together for Nia, one careful week at a time. Now one night of doing the right thing had torn a hole through all of it. Losing the job was not just an insult to his name. It was rent, groceries, bus fare, school shoes, and every quiet piece of stability he had fought to keep. That night, after Nia had finished her homework at the kitchen table, Malik stood at the sink with his hands braced against the counter and let memory come for him. It did not arrive as a single scene. It came in pieces. The low hum of hospice lights, the smell of tea gone cold, Tasha's breathing in the dark when sleep would not stay with either of them. He had spent so many nights beside her bed that silence itself had become a language. In those final months, he learnt that pain did not always cry out. Sometimes it hid behind stillness, behind closed eyes, behind the heavy distance of a body that could no longer answer the world. He learned to speak anyway, softly, clearly, never like a man begging to be heard, and never like someone offering pity. Just presence, just truth. Tasha had once turned her head toward him, tired but fully herself, and said the worst part was not the sickness. It was feeling invisible inside it, feeling people speak around you, over you, as if you were already fading before you were gone. That sentence had never left him. It was why, in the garage, one look at Claire Bennett had been enough. He had seen the same lost distance in her face. Different life, different kind of pain, same human truth. Nia looked up from the table and asked the question in the simple way only children could. "Daddy, is the missing lady all alone?" Malik turned, forcing his voice to stay gentle for her sake. He would give her the safe version, the one a child could carry without fear. "Someone's in trouble," he said, "and I have to do the right thing, even if it's hard." Nia thought about that, then nodded. Malik looked toward the dark window and answered more softly, almost to himself. "Not if I can help it." The call came just after 8, from a number Malik did not recognize. For a moment he considered letting it ring out, Too many strangers had found his phone since morning, some pretending to ask questions, others calling him things they would never have said to his face. But something in the timing made him answer. A woman's voice met him carefully. "Is this Malik Turner?" "Yes." "My name is Elena Ruiz." "I'm a nurse." She paused, as if measuring how much trust could fit inside one breath. "I've been caring for Claire Bennett." Every part of him went still. Elena did not waste words. She said Claire had not been found the way the public story claimed. She would not explain every detail over the phone. Not yet, but she needed Malik to know that the version being repeated on television did not match what hospital staff had quietly seen. Malik lowered himself into the kitchen chair. Across the room, Nia was drawing with her crayons, humming to herself, unaware that the air had changed. Elena continued in a voice kept low by habit. There were restrictions on which nurses could enter Claire's room. Visitor logs had been adjusted. Certain records were no longer easy to access. Each time staff asked reasonable questions, someone from the executive side stepped in and locked things down. "Executive side?" Malik repeated. "Yes," Elena said. "Requests are being made that do not feel medical." Then she said the sentence that shifted everything. "Claire may be unable to speak for herself right now." Malik closed his eyes. For one terrible moment, he saw Claire at her apartment door, pale and shaking, asking him not to tell anyone he had seen her that way. Elena added that a transfer was already being discussed. Quietly. Quickly. When the call ended, Malik sat in silence, staring at nothing. This was no longer just a false accusation wrapped around a disappearance. Claire might still be alive, and if she was alive, someone was controlling the space around her. Elena called again after midnight and gave Malik the name of a hospital that did not appear anywhere in the news. Claire Bennett had been placed in a private neurological recovery wing under a restricted alias, hidden behind layers of money, paperwork, and carefully limited access. The official story kept her vague. The real one kept her out of reach. Malik could not simply walk through the front doors and ask for her. His face had already been pushed across screens often enough to make that impossible, so Elena arranged something small and risky. During a shift change, when attention thinned and routines overlapped, she met him near a service corridor and led him upstairs without a word. Nothing prepared him for the sight of Claire in that room. The woman who had sat beside him in his car, trying not to let her life crack open in front of a stranger, now lay motionless beneath white sheets and quiet machines. Her face was pale, her body unnaturally still, as if the room had been built to hold silence in place. Malik stopped at the bedside, shocked by how much absence a living person could wear. Then he did the only thing he knew how to do. He pulled a chair closer and spoke to her the way he had spoken in the car. Calm, direct, respectful. He told her he did not know if she could hear him. He told her the world outside her door was already speaking over her. And because of that, he said, she deserved the truth spoken out loud. 2 nights later, Malik had no sitter and no good options. Staying home felt wrong. Leaving Claire alone in that hidden room felt worse. So he brought Nia with him again, telling her they were visiting someone who might still be able to hear kindness, even if she could not answer back. Nia walked in quietly, her small sneakers making almost no sound against the polished floor. In her hand, she carried a drawing folded once down the middle. When she reached Claire's bed, she opened it with careful fingers and placed it on the table beside the flowers Elena had brought earlier. It was a child's picture of a garden. 3 people stood under a bright blue sky, smiling in the simple, certain way children draw love. Beside them was a yellow bench, wide and glowing like a piece of sunshine made solid. Nia looked up at Claire's still face and spoke with the plain honesty adults spend years losing. "Hi," she said softly. "I made this for you, so you have somewhere pretty to think about." Malik stood back and let her have the room. Nia touched the edge of the paper. "My daddy says people can hear love even when they can't answer, so I think you should hear some." Inside the stillness of her body, Claire felt the words arrive with startling force. They did not sound grand or dramatic. They sounded true. In the locked darkness, where she had been trying not to disappear, That child's voice felt like a hand reaching in and refusing to let go. For the first time since waking into silence, Claire did not feel hidden from the whole world. Nia kept talking in the soft, wandering way children do when they feel safe enough to fill silence without fear. She pointed at the yellow bench in her drawing and explained that the middle person was probably Claire, if Claire wanted it to be. Malik listened with one hand resting lightly on the chair beside him, afraid to hope for anything, and unable to stop hoping anyway. Inside the prison of her still body, Claire gathered every scrap of strength she had. It felt impossible that so much effort could be required for something so small. She reached for her hand as if it belonged to someone else. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one finger gave the faintest response, a tiny, trembling twitch against the sheet. Malik leaned forward sharply. He was not even sure he had truly seen it. Elena, standing near the doorway with a chart in her hand, saw it too. Her eyes widened, but her training held. She moved to the monitors, checked the readings, and adjusted a line with practiced calm, careful not to draw attention from anyone outside the room. When she looked back at Malik, the answer was already in her face. Claire was still there. The knowledge changed the air itself. Not healed, not safe, but present. Malik stepped closer to the bed and bent near Claire's ear, his voice low and steady, exactly as it had been that night in the car when she was too tired to pretend. You are not alone. Claire could not cry. She could not speak. She could not turn her head toward the sound. But inside herself she seized those words and held on to them, like a rope thrown into deep water. Victor arrived the next afternoon with Daniel at his side and a leather folder, tucked neatly under one arm. The room smelled faintly of paper, cologne, and the polished calm of people who believed signatures could turn cruelty into order. Claire heard chairs move, heard the folder open, heard the quiet rustle of documents placed at the end of her bed, like offerings to a future she had not agreed to surrender. Victor called the paperwork necessary. Temporary guardianship, expanded medical authority, emergency business continuity. He used gentle words, careful words, words meant to sound merciful in case anyone else was listening. Daniel echoed him with a strained voice, asking whether this was truly the safest course. Victor answered that uncertainty was dangerous, that markets disliked confusion, and that Claire would want stability preserved. But when the door clicked shut behind a passing nurse, their voices changed. If she improves enough to communicate, Victor said, the property deal could collapse. Daniel swore under his breath. And the board? The board will follow the numbers. A few minutes later, Margaret entered, all precision and impatience. She did not ask how Claire was feeling. She asked how soon the papers could be enforced. The trust could shift if she regains capacity, she said. We cannot afford delay. There it was at last, stripped of any performance. Claire lay inside her silence and understood with painful clarity that what had happened to her was not some tragic side effect of ambition. Her disappearance, her helplessness, even this bed, had become part of a path Greed intended to walk. She could not move, but urgency now burned through every still inch of her. Elena sat alone in the staff room long after her break had ended, staring at the chart she had already read 3 times. For days she had told herself to be careful, to stay within the line, to document what she saw, and let someone above her decide whether it mattered. But every hour around Claire Bennett made that line feel smaller and less honest. So Elena made a choice she knew she could not take back. She began with the visitor logs. The approved list had changed too often, and never for reasons that made clinical sense. She copied entries by hand, then photographed the digital record when no one was watching. Names had been removed, times had been adjusted. One late-night visit showed no official sponsor at all, even though private security had escorted someone upstairs. From there, she checked Claire's intake report again and found the detail that made her sit up straight. Claire had not been admitted through the standard emergency route described in the public story. There was no city ambulance number, no documented pickup from a service road. She had arrived by private transport that was not properly registered in the system. Elena kept going. Buried inside the medication record was an extended sedation order with no clear medical explanation attached to it. The timing covered hours when neurological checks should have increased, not decreased. Someone had made it easier for Claire to remain voiceless. Alina leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. She knew exactly what crossing this line could cost. Her job, her license, her name. But she had worked in too many rooms where power tried to bury vulnerable people under forms, signatures, and official language. This time, she was not going to let the paperwork win. Malik came that evening after visiting a legal aid office and walking home with more questions than answers. The hospital room was dim, the machines low, the silence deep enough to make every word feel important. Claire lay where he had last seen her, still and pale, but no longer unreachable in the same way. Now he knew she was in there. Now he knew she was listening. He sat beside her bed and rested his hands together before speaking. "My wife's name was Tasha," he said softly. When she was in hospice, there were nights people looked at her and thought she was already gone. But she was there. She heard more than they knew. He glanced at Claire's hand, willing himself to stay steady. "I learned something beside her bed. Silence is not the same thing as absence. Just because someone can't answer the way the world prefers doesn't mean they aren't fighting to be heard." The yellow bench in Nia's drawing glowed from the bedside table, bright against the room. Malik leaned forward. "I'm not going to let them decide you're gone just because you can't fight in their language." The promise settled into the room with quiet force. But it did not end with Claire. As he sat there, Malik made another promise, one he did not speak aloud until it had rooted inside him. He would stop living at the mercy of their next move. He would stop defending himself one accusation at a time. He would expose them. And in the stillness, with the drawing beside her, Claire did not feel abandoned. Alina found the transfer order buried beneath routine updates, entered late enough in the system to avoid attention and early enough to become irreversible by morning. At first glance it looked respectable. Claire Bennett was being moved to a luxury long-term neurological facility in another state, one with discreet staff, private suites, and a reputation for specialized care. Everything about the language suggested compassion. Everything about the timing suggested fear. Alina read the notes twice, then a third time. No new medical change justified moving Claire so quickly. No emergency need explained the rush. The decision had come from the family representatives and been signed off through channels that always seemed to bend when money leaned on them hard enough. When she called Malik, her voice was tighter than he had ever heard it. "They're moving her tomorrow morning," she said. Very early, he went quiet. Officially, the transfer would place Claire somewhere better equipped for prolonged recovery. Unofficially, it would do something far more useful for the people circling her life. It would take her out of local reach, away from staff who had begun noticing inconsistencies, away from any detective close enough to question the timeline, and deeper into the control of the same family members already speaking over her bed like she belonged to paperwork instead of herself. Malik stood in his kitchen with the phone pressed to his ear and looked toward Nia's room, where the light under the door still glowed. He understood at once what Elena was really saying. If Claire left this hospital, the truth might leave with her. A woman who could hear but not speak would become even easier to bury somewhere quiet, somewhere expensive, somewhere no one without permission could reach. "When?" he asked. Before sunrise, after the call ended, the apartment seemed to shrink around him. By morning, Claire could be gone again, and this time, finding her might be impossible. A local news account posted newly released security footage from Claire's building. Within minutes, it spread everywhere. The video showed Malik helping Claire through the lobby and into the elevator, exactly as he had said. But it also showed something he had not fully explained. He did not leave the building as quickly as people expected. Several long minutes passed before he came back downstairs and walked out alone. That gap changed everything. To strangers online, it looked like the missing piece of guilt. Comment sections filled with certainty. He had lied. He had hidden something. He had more time alone with Claire than he admitted. The outrage rose fast, sharp, and ugly, feeding on class prejudice and the comfort people took in a simple villain. Malik stared at the clip until memory struck with painful force. The footage was real, but it was incomplete. Claire had asked him to bring her water after he got her upstairs. She had leaned against the kitchen counter, pale and unsteady, and he had waited until her breathing slowed enough for her to insist she was fine. At the time, those extra minutes had felt too ordinary to matter. Now, they looked like deception. He tried to explain it to Elena over the phone, but even as he spoke, he could hear how weak it sounded without proof. A man already under suspicion claiming there was an innocent reason for missing time was exactly the kind of story people laughed at before finishing. For the first time since this began, Malik felt the truth slipping farther away instead of closer from her bed. Claire learned to measure danger by voices in the hall. That afternoon, Victor stopped just outside her door with someone from legal, speaking in the low, polished tone he used when he wanted something ugly to sound reasonable. Claire could not see him, but she heard enough. The footage was edited for relevance, Victor said. No one needs unnecessary details muddying the timeline. A quiet answer followed, too soft to catch. Victor gave a short, impatient sigh. What matters is that it supports the narrative. Claire felt the words land like ice inside her. They were not only lying around her anymore, they were shaping evidence, trimming reality into the exact outline needed to bury Malik under suspicion. They had taken the minutes he spent helping her and sharpened them into a weapon. For a moment, rage burned so hard through her helpless body that she thought it might split the silence open. Instead, it sharpened her will. When Elena came in later to check her vitals, Claire gathered herself with a focus that felt almost violent. She pushed everything she had toward movement. Not a thought, not a scream, a command. Her hand answered with the smallest motion, stronger than before, enough for one finger to shift against the sheet. Elena froze, then looked straight at Claire. "I saw that," she whispered. Claire forced again, and the movement came once more, faint but real. Hope changed Elena's face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. She stepped closer, keeping her body between Claire and the open doorway. "Help is close," she said softly. "Stay with me." Claire could not nod or cry or speak, but she held on to Elena's voice the way a lost person holds on to the first light before morning. The black SUV came back to Malik's mind with the kind of clarity that only mattered too late. He mentioned it again when Elena met him in a quiet corner near the hospital loading area, and this time neither of them brushed it aside. Too many other pieces had already bent in the same direction. If someone had been waiting outside Claire's building that night, the car might be more than a detail. It might be the hinge the whole lie swung on. Elena started where hospitals often hid the truth without meaning to. Transport records, vendor codes, payment chains. Malik went back to Claire's building and found the overnight parking attendant, a tired older man who at first claimed not to remember anything unusual. Then Malik mentioned the dark SUV with tinted windows, and the man's face changed. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That one stayed longer than most. Engine running. Didn't belong to any resident I knew. He remembered it leaving well after Malik had driven away. That was enough for Elena to dig harder. Buried inside a billing file connected to Claire's intake, she found an invoice for private medical transport. The company name meant nothing on its own, but a deeper look showed it linked to a shell firm that had handled quiet logistics for Victor Hale's office before. It was not proof of every step, but it was proof of planning. The timing matched the missing stretch after Malik left Claire at home. It matched the hidden transport. It matched the lie about a public emergency pickup from some distant service road. For the first time, the truth had edges sharp enough to cut through doubt. Someone came for Claire after she was safely inside. Someone had arranged it before the night was over, before dawn, while the hospital still moved in hushed footsteps and dim light. Nia asked if they could see Claire one more time. Malik almost said no. Everything felt too urgent, too uncertain, too close to being taken away. But something in his daughter's face made him nod. Some goodbyes, he thought, should not be risked by fear. Nia walked into the room holding a new drawing against her chest. She went straight to the bedside table, where her first picture still stood, the yellow bench bright against all that careful white. Then she placed the second drawing beside it. This one showed the same garden, the same 3 people, but now there were flowers all around the bench, and words written in careful child handwriting across the top. "You are not alone." Nia stepped back so Malik could read it. His throat tightened before he spoke, but he read the words anyway, slowly and clearly, the way truth should be spoken in a room full of people fighting for it. "You are not alone." The sentence seemed to settle over everything. The machines, the silence, the fear. Inside herself, Claire reached for it with everything she had left. Her finger moved. Not the faint, uncertain twitch from before. This time it was clear enough that no one could mistake it for chance. The motion was small, but it was deliberate. Malik saw it. Elena saw it. Even Nia gasped and took one step closer to the bed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the whole room changed. Hope was no longer something they carried in secret. It had stepped out where all of them could see it. Elena waited until Nia was out in the hall with a juice box before she said there was one more thing. Her hand shook slightly as she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She told Malik she had not meant to make the recording. Weeks ago, while charting outside Claire's room, she had opened her voice notes by mistake when Victor stepped into the corridor speaking to someone in a low, urgent tone. She almost deleted it later. Then she listened. Victor's voice came through thin, but clear enough. "She needs to remain managed until the signatures are secured," he said. A pause followed, then the line that made Malik go still. "And keep the janitor narrative in place until it settles." The clip lasted less than 20 seconds. It did not explain everything. It did not show faces. It did not name every act that had led Claire from her home to this bed. But beside the transport invoice, the altered visitor logs, the false intake trail, and the rushed transfer order, it changed the shape of the case completely. Suspicion was no longer hanging only over Malik. It had somewhere else to land. For the first time, Elena let herself look afraid. Malik took the phone like it was evidence and a living thing at once. By sunrise, he was sitting across from the same detective who had once studied his apartment with quiet doubt. This time, Malik placed copies on the desk one by one and played the recording last. The detective's face did not soften, but it changed. By the end of the meeting, the case was no longer about a missing executive and the poor man who drove her home. The wall around the truth had finally cracked by morning. Everything was moving at once. The transfer order had been halted. The detective had reopened the case. Hospital administrators, suddenly more careful than before, approved an outside neurological specialist to examine Claire in the presence of independent staff. What had been hidden as private family concern was now being watched by people with no reason to protect Victor Hale or the Bennett name. The specialist did not rush. He spoke to Claire in a measured voice, explaining each step before asking for a response. First, he asked her to try moving one finger on command. The effort showed in nothing anyone could see at first, only in the terrible stillness of a woman fighting her own body. Then, slowly, one finger moved. Not by chance. Not by reflex. On command. The room changed. Next came eye tracking. The doctor held up a card, then a light, asking Claire to follow carefully. Her gaze lagged, trembled, lost focus, then found it again. It was slow, imperfect, and visibly exhausting. But it was real. By the end of the exam, no honest person in the room could deny what had just happened. Claire Bennett was conscious. Claire Bennett was aware. Daniel's composure broke first. He asked too many questions too quickly, his fear finally louder than his grief performance. Victor said almost nothing at all, and that silence was colder than panic. Margaret stopped pressing a hand to her chest and dropped the soft, wounded expression she had worn for days. For the first time since Claire disappeared, the powerful people around her looked exactly what they were. Afraid. It took several more days before speech came back as anything more than breath and strain. The doctors warned that every small gain would cost Claire enormous effort. Even lifting her eyes for too long left her exhausted. But awareness had been proven now, and once the world could no longer deny she was there, her voice began its slow return. Malik was beside her bed that afternoon, sitting in the same chair he had used from the beginning. Nia's drawings still stood on the table, the yellow bench bright between medicine cups and folded tissues. Elena had stepped out to speak with a therapist, leaving the room quiet except for the steady pulse of the monitors. Claire turned her head only slightly, a movement so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone who did not know how hard she had fought for every inch. Her eyes found Malik. He leaned forward at once, careful not to rush her. When she spoke, the sound was thin and broken, more whisper than voice, but it was unmistakably hers. "I heard you," she said, pausing for breath that seemed to scrape on the way out. Then, with all the strength she had left, she finished. Everything. Malik shut his eyes. That simple truth struck him harder than police questions, public apologies, or all the evidence stacked against the people who had tried to bury her. She had heard the lies spoken over her bed. She had heard the papers rustling at her feet, the threats disguised as care, the plans made in her silence. And she had heard every visit, every steady word, every moment he and Nia came back instead of walking away. When Claire was finally strong enough to speak in more than fragments, the truth came slowly, with rests between sentences and long pauses where her body had to catch up to her mind. Malik sat close, saying nothing unless she needed water or help. Elena stood near the window, listening with the stillness of someone who knew every word might matter later. Claire said the trouble had started before the board meeting ever ended. That night she had confronted Victor over side agreements he had kept off the official books, quiet arrangements tied to the property sale and voting control inside the company. The more she pushed, the clearer it became that Daniel and Margaret were pressuring her from another direction through the family trust. If Claire lost standing, if she appeared unstable or incapable, power could shift quickly. By the time Malik drove her home, she already knew people close to her had reason to fear her next move. She said she remembered getting inside, drinking water, and trying to steady herself after he left. After that, memory blurred, but now, with the hidden transport invoice, the altered hospital records, the extended sedation order, and Victor's recorded words, the shape of it was hard to deny. Someone had followed her home. Someone had drugged her or forced something into her system after Malik was gone. Then they staged the rest as a collapse and built a medical prison around the lie. What the world first called a disappearance was becoming something far worse and far clearer. It was attempted corporate theft wrapped in medical control, dressed up as concern and protected by family greed. The unravelling did not happen in one dramatic afternoon. It came the way truth often comes when powerful people have spent too long arranging it, through records, messages, signatures, and frightened silence turning into cooperation. Once the case reopened in full, company files began to line up with hospital discrepancies. Private transport records met altered intake reports. Visitor logs met internal emails. The story Victor Hale had managed so carefully began to collapse under the weight of its own planning. He was removed from Bennett Capital before the month was out. Later came the charges, built not on rumour, but on the chain of evidence he had once believed money could soften. For a man who had always spoken like control was a form of wisdom, his final public silence felt fitting. Daniel tried to stand in the space between guilt and grief, but the messages found on his phone stripped that shelter away. He had known more than he admitted. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. Enough to choose himself over his sister. Enough to let suspicion settle on Malik while he protected his name. Margaret fared no better. Her pressure on the trust, once hidden behind family duty and polished sorrow, became part of the public record. The Bennett name survived, but not cleanly. Its shine had been bought too often with other people's silence. Malik was cleared as publicly as he had once been doubted. Statements were issued. Apologies arrived. One company representative even offered him money with the careful tone of someone hoping pain could be settled like an invoice. Malik listened, thanked them for the truth, and refused the performance around it. What mattered was not that people finally admired him. What mattered was that they could no longer pretend not to see him. Claire's recovery was long, uneven, and humbling in all the ways public victory never showed. There were days her speech felt stronger, and days her body reminded her how much had been taken. But when she was finally able to return to Bennett Capital, she did not come back to reclaim the old image people had built around her. She came back to end what should never have begun. The predatory deal was stopped. The leadership around her was reshaped with quiet firmness. People who had mistaken her silence for weakness learned too late that survival could sharpen a person more than ambition ever had. Once the company was stable enough to stand without her daily fight, Claire stepped away from the centre of it. In its place, she built something that meant more. The new foundation began with patient advocacy and family support, shaped by the terrible knowledge of what it meant to be conscious, vulnerable, and spoken over. Claire wanted a system where no one could be hidden behind status, paperwork, or convenient assumptions. Families would have guidance. Patients without powerful names would have protection. Silence would not be treated like consent. She asked Malik to lead community operations, and when he hesitated, she told him the truth simply. She trusted his judgment. She trusted his heart. He accepted for those same simple reasons. What grew between them after that was not rushed or dressed up into easy romance. It was gentler than that. Respect first. Trust held steady over time. Two people changed by the same dark season, learning that closeness did not need performance to be real. And for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something to survive. It felt like something they could walk toward. The garden behind the new family centre was not large, but it felt carefully made for breathing. Paths curved through low flowers and clean grass. Wind moved softly through young trees. Nothing there demanded attention. It simply welcomed it. On mild afternoons, families sat in the quiet and let themselves feel safe for an hour. At the centre of the garden stood a yellow bench. Claire had laughed softly the first time she saw it, though tears came right after. It had been built to match Nia's drawing almost exactly, bright and hopeful in a place shaped by recovery. Now the three of them sat there together in the late light, as if a child's picture had stepped gently into the world. Claire was still healing. Her movements were slower than they once were, and some days her voice tired quickly. But she was here, present, no longer trapped behind silence, no longer unheard. Nia climbed up beside her and handed over a fresh drawing, the paper warm from her small hands. This one showed the garden as it was now, with bright flowers, open sky, and the three of them sitting on the yellow bench together. The figures were simple, smiling, and certain in the way only a child could make them. Claire looked at the picture for a long moment before smiling at Nia. "Thank you," she said, her voice still soft, but fully her own. Across from them, Malik watched with the quiet disbelief of a man who had been doubted, blamed, and nearly buried under someone else's lie, yet had somehow come through it without letting bitterness harden him. And in that gentle place, the truth that changed everything remained simple. Being seen can save a life, and being heard can return one. Claire's disappearance began as a trap built from money, fear, and polished lies. What saved her was not power, but presence. A black single dad who could have looked away chose kindness instead. A little girl's drawing reached where machines and lawyers could not. A nurse risked her future to tell the truth. And a woman the world tried to silence came back with her voice intact enough to name what happened. In the end, justice mattered, but so did the garden, the bench, and the people who stayed. Some lives are changed by being rescued, others are changed by finally being seen and heard.